Hello everyone, this is Jeff of Tal Fledermaus. Just to let you know that we're still alive. We just have not been able to film as much because of the excessive heat. It's just almost to the point of dangerous to go out and film in this heat. But I haven't forgotten about you, and we haven't forgotten about the CO2 not being able to fit in a 12 gauge. The CO2 capsule is about 13 thousandths of an inch too big for the bore of a 12 gauge. So if it doesn't fit a 12 gauge, then it must fit a 10 gauge, and it would. But I want to discuss some of the other reasons why that's just not practical. Now, besides just trying to find a 10 gauge, which aren't very common around here, the components that you would need are also kind of hard to find. While yes, there has been a shortage of components for every type of caliber, the 10 gauge has not quite recovered, and it's still hard to get just the very basics. Now, even if all these wads were in stock, you can see the choices for 10 gauge are really limited. These wads are made for holding large volumes of birdshot. The 10 gauge is exceptional for turkey, duck, and geese, but it never really evolved past that. Now, on the other hand, 12 gauge components have been making a comeback and are more likely to be in stock now. And on top of that, there is a greater variety of components for the 12 gauge than there is for the 10 gauge. Now we have wads not only for birdshot, but also short gas seals that are used for slugs. Now, a lot of people have the idea that the bore of a 10 gauge is much bigger than that of a 12 gauge. But the 10 gauge is only about 1 millimeter or 46 thousandths of an inch larger in bore diameter than the 12 gauge. And what does 46 thousandths of an inch look like? It's just a little bit more than the thickness of a micro SD card. So slugs from a 10 gauge would not be much bigger or heavier than that of a 12 gauge. And no one makes a rifled barrel for a 10 gauge, but you can shoot over 3 ounces of shot out of a 10 gauge. So a CO2 cartridge does not fit a 12 gauge, I get it. So instead of finding a gun that fits the projectile, how about we find a projectile that fits the gun? Does that make more sense? Especially a projectile that needs spin stabilization to function correctly. With these nitrous cartridges, we have about 20 thousandths of an inch to play with, and that's a good thing. Now, the first problem we have to solve is how to support this thing properly. If we just stuff this in the shell, all that pressure would just blow out that gas seal and probably crush the nipple of that capsule. So what we have to do is make a special support wad just for these capsules. We start out with a little bit of water and some toilet paper, believe it or not, and we just mix it into a pulp. And we'll add a little bit of white glue to the mixture just to keep everything bound together. Now, I know that all the 3D printer guys are saying, oh man, I could have made those things in my 3D printer. It would only take like 4 hours to program and 8 hours to print each one. Okay, whatever, but this is free and it's really easy. Once we have our slurry of toilet paper, we can use an old shell, stick our cartridge in there, use the shell as kind of a mold, and that'll keep everything centered and keep everything the right diameter. And then we just start packing our toilet paper slurry in there. And I imagine this looks like a lot of work to some people who aren't used to what hard work looks like, but it's really easy and it's relatively fast. I only have to make like 8 or 9 of these things for this project, so it's not like I have to go into full production and find some easier way of doing this. Now we just let it dry overnight, and now we have a nice custom-made support wad that's very light but also about as hard as wood. And it's biodegradable and safe for septic tanks. Alright, we got our shell loaded with powder, we got our gas seal in there, and then we'll slip a little short fiber wad in there just to give it a little bit more support. Not sure if that's really needed or not, but why not? And then we slip in our custom-made support wad. Now the next step is we have to put a little baby roll crimp on there. Now we can't put the roll crimp on after we put this capsule inside the shell, so we have to do it beforehand. And that little roll crimp allows us to still slide that capsule inside the shell. Our goal is to have a stable flying projectile, and the only way to make something this long stable in flight is to spin it. So it has to engage the rifling, but with 20 thousandths of an inch slop there, it would never get that spin. So we just have to bulk it up a little bit. This foil tape is about 10 thousandths of an inch, so that'll allow us to build up and bulk up this capsule so that it fits snugly in the barrel. As you can see, 2 layers of it is not enough. It's got to be tight enough that you'd have to drive it through there with a hammer. But when we have 3 layers, it's just right. It should engage the rifling now and give us that spin. How well they'll fly even with that spin, we'll never know until we try it. Now, one thing I discovered was 1 layer of electrical tape is just right. Gives us that engagement we need, and it's just a lot simpler. I personally think that the nitrous shells are a lot cooler looking and cooler sounding than a CO2 capsule. And we didn't have to go out and buy a 10 gauge and all the equipment, presses, holes, components to make it happen just so we could shoot CO2 capsules out of a shotgun. Anyway, let us know what you'd like us to shoot these things at. You aren't just viewers, you are participants in this channel, and we do value your comments. In our next video, we'll actually get down to testing these with your ideas. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.